The call came at 6:47 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I had just set my coffee mug down on the counter and the screen lit up with my brother's name. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, not since his wedding rehearsal dinner where he'd made a comment about my uniform, something about how I always had to make everything about the military. I'd let it go. I was good at letting things go back then. I answered. "There's something you should know," he said. "No hello, no how are you, just that." I didn't start it. "I want you to know that up front." I set the coffee down. "Start what?" He told me that her sister had filed a complaint, a formal one, through his wife's employer, a federal contracting firm that had some kind of oversight relationship with the base where I was stationed. He said she'd been talking to people, said she had documents, said she was claiming that my deployment record contained entries that didn't match official DoD databases. I stood in my kitchen in Fort Campbell, Kentucky in my socks holding the phone, and I did not say a single word for a very long time. "Are you there?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm here. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and at the time of this story, I was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army, 8 years in, stationed at the 101st Airborne. I had 2 deployments on my record, one to Kuwait, one to Afghanistan. I had a service record that I kept cleaner than my apartment. I had never, not once, done anything that even brushed the edge of a regulation. My sister's name is Adrienne. She is 2 years older than me, has a master's degree in public administration, and worked, at the time, as a compliance analyst for a federal contractor. She reviewed records for a living, audited things, found discrepancies in paperwork and wrote reports about them. And apparently she had decided to write one about me. What I didn't know yet, what took me weeks to fully piece together, was why. The short version is this: Adrienne had applied for a senior position at her firm, a promotion she had been working toward for almost 3 years. The position required a security clearance upgrade. During the vetting process, the investigator had looked into her family members, standard procedure, and had flagged something in my records, not a real discrepancy. A data entry inconsistency. The kind that happens when records are migrated between systems, when old formats don't translate cleanly into new ones. My Afghanistan deployment had 2 slightly different date ranges listed in 2 different databases, off by 11 days, because the unit I was attached to during the final rotation had its own reporting timeline. It was nothing. Any JAG officer or records clerk with 2 years of experience would have looked at it and moved on. But Adrienne didn't move on. Later, people would ask me why. What did she gain? I've thought about it a lot. I think the honest answer is complicated. I think she was under pressure. I think the clearance review was stalling her promotion and she was embarrassed. I think she looked at my name in that file and made a decision, not a fully conscious one maybe, but a decision that if she flagged to herself, she'd look proactive, thorough, like she had integrity. Like she was the kind of person who didn't let family ties compromise her professional judgment. I think she also thought nothing would happen to me. I don't think she understood what she was setting in motion. The official notification came 9 days after my brother's call. A letter from the Inspector General's office routed through my chain of command, informing me that a formal inquiry had been opened regarding potential irregularities in my service record. My first sergeant called me into his office at 0800. He had the letter on his desk and he looked at me the way people look at you when they don't know yet whether to be angry or concerned. "You want to tell me what this is?" he said. "No, Sergeant," I said, because I genuinely have no idea. That was true. I had the general shape of it from my brother's call, but I hadn't seen the actual complaint yet. I didn't know what specific claims had been made, what language had been used, how far up it had gone. I found out that afternoon. The complaint alleged that the dates on my Afghanistan deployment record had been manually altered, that the discrepancy between the 2 databases was not a migration error but an intentional falsification, likely to inflate my time in theater, which would have affected certain bonus calculations and possibly my eligibility for a specific commendation I'd received in 2019. Reading it felt like being hit with something I couldn't see. Because here's the thing about a commendation in the Army. Here's the thing about a deployment record. These are not pieces of paper you fill out yourself. The dates are logged by your unit, verified by your CO, entered by again clerks, cross-referenced against travel vouchers, flight manifests, medical records from theater. There are 6 different ways the same date appears in 6 different places, and they all have to match. The idea that I had somehow reached into multiple independent systems and changed 11 days across all of them, it wasn't just false, it was logistically absurd. But I was learning something that week that I hadn't fully understood before. It doesn't matter if something is absurd. Once it's written down and submitted formally, someone has to process it. Someone has to open a file. Someone has to schedule a meeting. I was assigned a JAG officer named Captain Reyes. She was 34, had kind eyes, and a very direct way of speaking, and she sat down with me the first day and said, "Okay, walk me through your deployment timeline. All of it. Don't leave anything out even if it sounds minor." I walked her through it. 2 hours. Dates, units, rotations, the transition period, the reason for the 11-day overlap, the specific reporting structure of the attached unit. She took notes. She didn't react. She just wrote. When I was done, she looked up and said, "Do you know who filed this?" I told her. She wrote my sister's name down, underlined it once. Then she said, "Okay," and closed her notebook. That was the whole reaction. Just okay. I asked her what I should do in the meantime. "Go do your job," she said. "Let me do mine." What I didn't tell Captain Reyes, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that 2 days before the official notification arrived, my mother had called me. My mother is a woman who has spent 63 years believing that family loyalty is the highest possible virtue. She grew up in a household where you didn't air things outside the family, where you solved problems internally, where the worst thing you could do was cause problems for someone else in the family. She holds on to this belief with both hands even when, especially when, it leads her to do things she shouldn't do. She called to tell me she had spoken with Adrian, that she understood the situation, that she wanted me to know she was praying for everyone involved. Praying for everyone involved is my mother's way of not taking a side while making it very clear whose side she's on. I asked her directly, "Did Adrian tell you she filed a complaint against me?" Long pause. She told me she had professional obligations she had to meet. "Mom." She filed a formal complaint alleging I falsified my military record. Another pause. "Claire, your sister has a career to protect." I hung up. I didn't call back for 6 weeks. What happened next was something I genuinely hadn't anticipated, even though in retrospect it made a certain cold logical sense. Adrian, through my mother, made contact with my father. My parents have been divorced since I was 16, but they maintain a kind of civil relationship built around holidays and grandchildren and the shared project of managing their adult children. My father is retired Army himself. 22 years, Vietnam era. Deeply proud of his service. Adrian told him a version of the story. I don't know exactly what version. But she told him enough that he called me and said, "I need to know the truth. Did you do something to your record?" My own father. Asking me that. "No," I said. "Dad. No, my record is clean. You can look at it. The Army is going to look at it. Everyone is going to look at it." He said he just needed to hear it from me. I said I understood, but I also heard something in his voice, a hesitation, a held breath, that told me he wasn't sure. He wasn't sure. After 22 years of service himself, after raising me in a household where the military's record-keeping was treated as something close to sacred, he wasn't completely sure his own daughter was telling the truth. That was the hardest moment of the whole thing. Harder than the letter. Harder than the meeting with my first sergeant. Harder than sitting across from Captain Reyes while she underlined my sister's name. The inquiry took 47 days. During that time, I showed up to work every day. I did my job. I didn't talk about it except to Captain Reyes and once to my closest friend in my unit, a sergeant first class named Vivienne who had been in for 15 years and who listened to the whole story without interrupting and then said, "Your sister is going to regret this." Not in the threatening way, just as a statement of fact, like she'd seen this kind of thing resolve itself before and she knew how it went. I held on to that. During week 3, Captain Reyes called me to her office and told me that the investigation had expanded. This was not bad news for me, though it took her a moment to explain why. In pulling my records to audit them, the investigation team had pulled the full chain of documentation, flight manifests, unit logs, the attached unit separate reporting timeline. Every single document matched. Not mostly matched. Matched completely, with the 11-day discrepancy fully explained by the transition between unit reporting systems, which was itself documented in a memo from 2019 that someone had apparently forgotten was in the file. But in pulling all of that documentation, the investigators had also looked at the original complaint, at how it was filed, at who had access to what systems and when, and they had found something. Adrian had accessed my service record before she filed the complaint, not through official channels, not as part of her job. She had used her firm's contractor access to pull a portion of my record as a background review. But the record she pulled wasn't part of any officially assigned audit. There was no work order, no authorization. She had accessed it because she could, because her clearance level gave her proximity to DoD personnel databases, and she had used that access to look at her sister's file. That alone was a problem. That alone was a reportable violation of her firm's data access protocols. But there was something else. In her formal complaint, Adrian had described the discrepancy with a level of specificity that should not have been possible unless she had accessed the record directly. She referenced specific database field labels that were only visible in the internal system interface, not in any report or summary that would have been shared through normal channels, which meant she had pulled the record herself, identified the discrepancy, and then filed a complaint framing it as something she'd encountered through official review. She had manufactured the paper trail. Captain Reyes explained this to me carefully, like she was handing me something fragile. She said, "I want to be clear. This is not something you need to act on. The investigators are handling it. Your record has been fully cleared. The finding is documented. The complaint is closed." I sat with that for a moment. "What happens to her?" I asked. "That's not my lane," she said. "But the findings will be referred to her firm and to the relevant oversight office." I walked out of that building into a Tuesday afternoon in October, and I stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes. The air was that specific fall temperature that makes everything feel slightly unreal. I called Vivienne. She answered on the second ring, and I said, "It's done," and she said, "I know," and neither of us said anything else for a little while. The formal clearance letter came 8 days later. My first sergeant called me in again, same office, same desk. He had the letter. He put it in front of me and said, "I want this documented in your file." He said it like it was routine, like he was scheduling a training exercise, but when I picked the letter up, he said, "For what it's worth, Sergeant, I never had any doubt." He wasn't someone who said things like that easily. I knew that. I said, "Thank you, Sergeant. I meant it." The thing about being cleared is that the clearing doesn't undo everything that happened on the way there. My father's hesitation on the phone is still in my memory. My mother's silence is still there. The 47 days of showing up and doing my job while something large and wrong was moving through official channels, that doesn't disappear when a letter arrives. But I kept going. That's what you do. I called my father 3 weeks after the clearance. I sent him the letter officially. The whole thing. The findings, the explanation of the database discrepancy, the statement that the complaint had been found to be unsupported by evidence. He read it and called me back the same day. He said, "I'm sorry I asked you that." He said it straight, no hedging. My father is not a man who apologizes easily either. I told him I understood. I told him it was okay. The second part wasn't completely true, but I said it, and over time it became more true. My mother took longer. She called me eventually, not to apologize exactly, but to say she had been wrong to use the phrase professional obligations. She said it in a way that was as close to an acknowledgement as she was capable of, and I accepted it. Because she is my mother and she is 63 years old and she is doing the best she can with what she has. Adrian and I have not spoken since. She lost her position at the firm. The data access violation alone was enough for that. Using contractor clearance to pull a family member's personnel record without authorization. The referral to the oversight office led to a separate review of her firm's data access protocols. I don't know the full details. I know she was gone from that job within 2 months of the complaint being closed. I've thought a lot about what she thought was going to happen. I think she thought the complaint would go into some office somewhere and sit in a drawer, that someone would look at my record, note the discrepancy, ask me about it, I'd explain it, and it would be resolved quietly. That she'd get her proactive compliance professional points without any real consequence for anyone. I think she genuinely didn't understand that when you file a formal complaint against an active duty service member alleging record falsification, it doesn't go in a drawer. It goes to people whose entire job is to pull every thread until there's nothing left to pull. She pulled a thread. They pulled all of them, and some of those threads led back to her. I'm not glad she lost her job. I want to be honest about that. She is my sister. She was in my life for 30 years before any of this happened. We fought over the bathroom and borrowed each other's clothes without asking and sat next to each other at every Christmas table I can remember. There is a version of Adrian I love, or loved, and that person is still somewhere inside this story even when I can't quite see her. But I am glad that the truth was what it was. I am glad my record is what it is. I am glad that when someone opened that file and looked at it carefully, what they found was exactly what I told them they would find. That part, I'm not just glad, I'm proud. 8 years of keeping your record clean means 8 years of choices, small ones mostly, the kind no one sees. Showing up. Filing things correctly. Not cutting corners, even when corners are available and no one is watching. You do that long enough and it becomes the kind of thing that speaks for you when you can't speak for yourself. My record spoke for me for 47 days. That was enough. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about what Adrian actually believed was going to happen. I don't think she thought of it as betrayal. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. I think she told herself a story where she was just doing her job, being professional, being thorough, being the kind of person who doesn't let personal relationships compromise her standards. I think she filed that complaint and went home and slept fine, because in her version, nothing serious was going to happen to me. The discrepancy would get noted, I'd explain it, it would be resolved, and she'd have a clean conscience and a stronger case for her promotion. What she didn't account for was the part where actions have weight regardless of the intent behind them. You don't get to decide how seriously something lands just because you threw it gently. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the anger. I've mostly worked through the anger, but the mechanics of it. The way she used a real tool, a real system, a real complaint process, and assumed she could control what it did once she let it go. She couldn't. Nobody can. Once you put something official into motion, it moves according to its own rules, and those rules don't care about your reasoning. Her access log didn't care that she thought she was being professional. The data showed what it showed. She had pulled my record without authorization. She had used internal database field labels in a complaint that she could only have known if she'd accessed the system herself. The investigators followed those threads not because they were looking for her, they were looking for the truth about me, but truth doesn't stop when it finds what you were originally looking for. It keeps going. I think about Vivienne telling me, early on, your sister is going to regret this. At the time, I didn't fully believe her. I was in the middle of it, and when you're in the middle of something like that, it's hard to see past the weight of it. 47 days of showing up and doing your job while an open inquiry sits in your file. 47 days of your father's voice on the phone with that held breath in it. That's not nothing. That sits in you. But here's what I've learned from it, and I mean actually learned, not the kind of lesson you repeat because it sounds right. Integrity is not something you perform when people are watching. It's the accumulation of small, invisible choices made over years, and it either holds or it doesn't when the pressure comes. My record held because I had built it to hold. Not because I was thinking about some future moment when someone would try to tear it apart. I wasn't. I was just doing the work correctly every time because that's what the work required. Adrian's choices held too. They just held differently. And I think about what it cost her. Not in a satisfying way, not like I'm glad she paid a price, because I'm genuinely not. I think about it because it clarifies something important. Intelligence without ethics is just a sharper tool for digging yourself into a hole. She was smart. She knew systems. She knew how to navigate professional environments. None of that protected her when what she had built came apart, because what she had built wasn't solid. It was built on the assumption that she could manage outcomes, that she could pull a thread and control where it led. You can't control where truth leads. You can only decide whether you're standing somewhere you're willing to be found. I'm still in the army. My record is still clean. And I know now, more clearly than I did before any of this happened, that the work you do when no one is watching is exactly what speaks for you when everything is on the line. That's the only version of security I trust anymore, the kind you build yourself, one honest day at a time.